With Trump's America First policy and ongoing tensions with China threatening global growth, uncertainty surrounding Brexit still dominating headlines, and fintech continuing to disrupt the landscape. How do we navigate the biggest issues impacting trade in 2019? "2018 was a tumultuous year for trade. Threats, actual tariffs, negotiations between the US and its trading partners close to home and further afield. And the biggest dispute impacting confidence and growth globally, the US and China, is yet to be resolved. Under that context, what sort of year can we expect, Arancha?
Well, if I look at what happened last year, was a lot of complacency. I was here a year ago in Davos. I heard lots of people very excited by the tax cuts in the US, the regulatory drive, and creating a sense of comfort that then did not materialize. So I hope what we do in 2019 is be a little bit better at forecasting, be a little bit better at understanding the opportunities, but also the risks, and coming together to mitigate the risks. There's been a bit of a beginning of that with the dialogue between the US and China. It's a good step. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need to see this confidence now being translated to the World Trade Organization, where countries are going to have to improve the rules of international trade globally.
Jose, the market investors simplified it as good Trump and bad Trump. And we had good Trump in 2017, then we had bad Trump in 2018. All of the trade fears really coming to the fore. And now, as we enter 2019, we have the IMF downgrading its forecast for global growth, a weakening pace of growth that we're now expected to see. What do you make of trade and how it's going to influence the macro environment?
I think that a number of the claims that the United States has are legitimate. But the question is, how do you resolve those valid claims? How do you validate them? And I think that the dialogue between the United States and China is a very critical piece for that. And I am hopeful that the conversations which are ongoing may materialize into something which will certainly not be a quick win, but at least on certain agreement of a framework to continue discussing things, not only around trade, but also around market access, which is very, very, very important. Things like intellectual property, the role of state-owned enterprises and so on in China, which are very fundamental. And I think that the key thing there is to convince China that these things are also good for China, because having a more open economy, more open to the world, would mean more competition. And ultimately, this is something which is going to be good for China's long-term growth possibilities and standards of living.
Ambassador, I'm very excited to tap into your wealth of experience and knowledge. You've seen a trade fight or two. How does 2019 now look, given that the US and China cannot seem to resolve their differences?
Well, let me start with some context. President Trump, in my long experience in trade and dealing with presidents, has been the most disruptive force in trade that we've seen of any modern president, throwing out all conventions.
Is that a bad thing?
He believes, I think it is, but it may lead to some good results. He believes that trade deficits, which we run traditionally, are inherently bad and a threat to national security and are a result of being, quote unquote, cheated, of having bad trade results, and therefore, that has led him to unprecedented actions under little-used presidential authority to impose unilateral tariffs against not only China, but against our closest allies on national security grounds: Canada, the European Union, Mexico, Japan, South Korea. And this is really quite extraordinary. It's caused a great roiling of supply chains and made a very difficult environment. I think it's one of the reasons why the stock market has been so volatile. Now, I think we're going to actually see a better result in 2019. And in a way, it's a result of the economic power that, although he's done it in an unconventional way with a lot of glass being broken, will lead to some positive results. We've already seen, for example, with the US and South Korea, a new agreement that will give more market access for US car makers in South Korea. We've already seen a new NAFTA agreement, North American Free Trade Agreement, which he had threatened to back away from, which provides more U.S. content in automobiles, higher wages are being required, $16 an hour. And with the European Union, to whom I was the ambassador, he backed away from further tariff increases on aluminum steel and is trying to negotiate a free trade agreement. Now, with China, my prediction is the following. With all the conflict that's occurred, with over $200 billion of unilateral tariffs and the threats of another $200 billion, I believe that there will be a deal by May 1, which is the date that the President Xi and President Trump set at the G20. And the reason is both countries need it. Growth is slowing significantly in China. Their stock market is down. They need the U.S. market. But from the U.S. standpoint, although President Trump said it's easy to win this trade war, we're the ones that have the big deficits, he's found quite the contrary. His closest allies, business community, the Chamber of Commerce, major companies, agricultural interests have all said these tariffs are hurting us. China's retaliated. And most important, he's going into a re-election cycle. And he realizes, and I think Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has dramatized this to him, that the biggest cloud on the U.S. economy, and therefore on his re-election, is a potential trade war with China. So I believe there will be a deal. I think it'll be a modest one, but he'll declare it's the greatest deal in history, and his base will accept it.